Hey guys, this is Doug with fellowshipofthemartyrs.com. I want to talk to you some. There have been a number of folks that don't understand what it is I'm trying to teach about various topics, and across the board on a whole bunch of things. The fundamental thing is to understand what the Bible says about governments. And so I want to make sure that we do a video about that and explain that to you first, and kind of lay some of the foundational stuff for other things that need to be explained. Okay, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the governments of man and what the Bible says about that, and we need to be clear about that if we're going to be able to proceed on to other things, to the deeper things. The Bible says that the natural man cannot understand the things of the Spirit. The Bible says that if you split up into teams and pick the names of men, 1 Corinthians 3 says, if you say, I'm for Apollos, I'm for Paul, I'm for Cephas, I'm for Christ, even if you say I'm for Christ and what you mean is you're not, so you can't play with me, then you're carnal and not spiritual, and the carnal man cannot understand the things of the Spirit. And first and foremost, the Bible is a spiritual manual. And sure, there are instructions in here about natural things, about what to eat and how to dress and whatever. But those are still spiritual on some level that we need to understand and identify and apply. Okay? Anyway, first and foremost, to get an understanding of this, I'm going to try to do this justice in 10 minutes, is that you need to read the Great Ecclesiastical Conspiracy. I'll put the links over here. Hey, I got it right. It's over there. And to the Great Ecclesiastical Conspiracy, and you will see, as you study through that stuff, that the King James Version of the Bible was specifically and intentionally doctored so as to establish king and pope over the people. And there are passages that were specifically tweaked this way or that so as to get people to believe that they were saying something they didn't really believe, or words that were transliterated instead of translated so as to obfuscate their meaning, like presbyter and other things. Anyway, also places even where words were added that are not in the Greek, that do not exist, that do not belong there, that change the whole structure of that are in the King James. And it's a really dangerous thing. So I'll put the link over here. We got free audio book, free book you can print off and read. It's a short little thing, but it will go through the history of the King James and how it was specifically and intentionally doctored to overcome the Geneva Bible that basically didn't preach king and pope and seemed to the king who thought that he was God's messenger to create anarchy. Anyway, specifically we're going to talk about Romans 13 most of all. At the moment. Now, Romans 13 is the main passage that is used to establish our responsibility to obey the government, the governments of man, civil governments, okay? And I want to read you the King James for this passage. Now, most of your King James Bibles, study Bibles or whatever specifically, it's going to have as a heading right above there, the Christian and civil law, or the Christian and obedience to governments, or whatever like that. But I'm going to read you specifically what the King James says about in Romans 13, 1 through 7. Okay? Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God, and the powers that be are ordained of God. Okay, the word power here over and over is the same word that's used when he talks about our battles not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. Now, it is used in relation to civil governments at some times, but I need you to really consider carefully and prayerfully whether this passage is talking about civil governments. Let every power be subject, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Okay? That's really important there. And that word, look it up in the Greek, see that this is a spiritual, permanent thing that the Bible is saying will come on you if you resist the power. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then be afraid of the power? To do that which is good, and do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, the powers, is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. Okay, so he bears the sword of God. For he is the minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Okay, ministering for the Lord as agents of his wrath, maintaining governments, maintaining powers. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Okay. The only thing in this passage that specifically looks like something governmental is the word tributes. And it is listed there along with honor and fear. Okay? So it's not specifically, that verse is not specifically talking about just natural things, but also spiritual things. And if you consider that these powers that this passage is talking about are spiritual powers, not governmental civil powers, then it makes a lot more sense. You need to understand that Romans 13, particularly that first chunk of that chapter, is wedged in between Romans 12, which is all about body life, all about spiritual things, and Romans 14, which again is all about body life and spiritual things. And even the remainder of that chapter is entirely spiritual. So what you have to do is come to the conclusion that in the midst of an entire passage about spiritual body life within the body of Christ, within Christians, each walking in their roles, each walking in their callings, all of a sudden there's this thing about magistrates and civil governments. Okay? I don't believe that this has anything to do with civil governments at all. And here's part of why I'm going to tell you why. Verse 2 says, Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, because God has ordained these and set them into place. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Okay? There's no loophole here. People, there are certainly passages that say we're supposed to pray for our kings, for our leaders, for those who are set over us. Yes, we are. Okay. Now, this passage says that if this is about civil governments, then the Bible says, that these governments, that all governments, that every elected official, that every law that gets on the books, that every county clerk, every whatever, is set in place by God, a minister of God, and if you resist them, you will heap on your head damnation from God. Okay? There is no loophole. There is no gray area. There is no out. If you believe that Romans 13 in those verses is talking about civil authorities, when they pass a law telling you to take the mark of the beast, you cannot disobey them without damnation to your soul. Okay? How can we justify smuggling Bibles into China or Russia or somewhere else, or disobeying anti-conversion laws in India or wherever else, if every single civil government ever is set in place by God, and to resist them we heap damnation on ourselves? There is no loophole. I've had people say, well, if it goes against the laws of God, we're not going to obey that. Of course, if they say to take the mark, I'm not going to take the mark. You don't have that option. You don't have that option. If that verse is about civil governments, you must, at all times, obey in every situation or go to hell. That's literally what it says if you believe the powers that are talked about here are civil governments. You have no out. Martin Luther King is in hell if this is true because he passively resisted the government, whatever, apartheid, whatever, slavery, whatever it is. According to that verse, if this is about civil governments and you resist them in any way, you are going to hell. You will heap damnation on you because they're agents of God and bear the sword of God to punish you spiritually. Civil governments do not have the authority from God to punish you spiritually. You're jumping spirals from the natural to the spiritual, whichever spiritual, natural, I don't know, side by side. I don't know how it works, which is in the order. Whatever. The point is they're two different things, and you don't get to hop from one to the other. This is about spiritual authorities. This is about spiritual governments. This is about the elders that are set in place by God. This is about the apostles that are called by God. This is about Christ the head. This is not about civil governments. Now, if you owe tribute, pay tribute. If you owe honor, pay honor. If you owe fear, pay fear. But this cannot be about civil governments. Now, I want to show you in the next video more about this.